The fair, Catronellier, and Piff-Paff Poultry. Good day, Father Holentha. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your daughter? Oh yes, if Mother Malcho Milking Cow, Brother High and Mighty, Sister Kessatrout, and Fair Catronelli are willing, you can have her. Where is Mother Malcho then? She is in the barn, milking the cow. Good day, Mother Malcho. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your daughter? Oh yes, if Father Holentha, Brother High and Mighty, Sister Kessatrout, and Fair Catronelli are willing, you can have her. Where is Brother High and Mighty then? He is in the room, chopping wood. Good day, Brother High and Mighty. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your sister? Oh yes, if Father Holentha, Mother Malcho, Sister Kessatrout, and Fair Catronelli are willing, you can have her. Where is Sister Kessatrout then? She is in the garden, cutting cabbages. Good day, Sister Kessatrout. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. May I be allowed to have your sister? Oh yes, if Father Holentha, Mother Malcho, Brother High and Mighty, and Fair Catronellia are willing, you can have her. Where is Fair Catronellia then? She is in the room counting her pennies. Good day, Fair Catronellia. Many thanks, Piff-Paff Poultry. Will you be my sweetheart? Oh yes, if Father Holentha, Mother Malcho, Brother High and Mighty, and Sister Kessatrout are willing, I am ready. Fair Catronelli, how much dowry do you have? 14 pennies in ready money, 3.5 groschen in debt, half a pound of dried apples, a handful of fried bread, a handful of spices, and so forth. Isn't that a good dowry? Piff-Paff Poultry, what is your trade? Are you a tailor? Something much better. A shoemaker? Something much better. A farmer? Something much better. A carpenter? Something much better. A blacksmith? Something much better. A miller? Something much better. Perhaps a broom maker? Yes, that's what I am. Isn't that a fine trade? The Fox and the Horse. A peasant had a faithful horse that had grown old and could no longer serve. The master decided he would not feed the horse anymore and said, I certainly can no longer use you, but I mean well by you. If you can prove yourself still strong enough to bring me a lion here, I will keep you. But now, get out of my stable. And with that, he chased the horse out into the open field. The horse was sad and went to the forest to seek some protection from the weather. There, the fox met him and said, Why are you hanging your head and wandering around so alone? Alas, replied the horse, avarice and loyalty do not dwell together in one house. My master has forgotten the services I have rendered him for so many years, and because I can no longer plow properly, he will not give me any more food and has driven me away. Without any consolation? Asked the fox. The consolation was poor. He said that if I were still strong enough to bring him a lion, he would keep me, but he well knows that I cannot do that. The fox said, I will help you. Just lie down, stretch yourself out, and do not move, as if you were dead. The horse did as the fox asked. The fox then went to the lion, who had his den not far away, and said, A dead horse is lying outside. Come with me, and you can have a rich meal. The lion went with him, and when they were standing by the horse, the fox said, It's not very comfortable for you here. How about this? I will tie it to you by the tail, and then you can drag it into your cave and devour it in peace. The lion liked this idea and lay down to let the fox tie the horse to him. The fox, however, tied the lion's legs together with the horse's tail and twisted and secured everything so well and so tightly that no strength could break it. When he had finished his work, he tapped the horse on the shoulder and said, Pull, white horse, pull. The horse sprang up at once and dragged the lion away with him. The lion began to roar so loudly that all the birds in the forest flew up in terror, but the horse let him roar and dragged him across the field to his master's door. When the master saw the lion, he reconsidered and said to the horse, You shall stay with me and have a good life, and he gave him plenty to eat until the horse died. The Worn-Out Shoes. Once upon a time, there was a king who had 12 daughters, each more beautiful than the last. They all slept together in one hall, where their beds stood side by side. In the evenings, when they were lying in their beds, the king locked and bolted the door. However, in the morning, when he unlocked the door, he saw that their shoes had been danced to pieces, and no one could find out how this had happened. The king then proclaimed that whoever could discover where they danced at night would be able to choose one of them as his wife and become king after his death. However, whoever came forward and could not discover it within 3 days and nights would forfeit his life. Not long after, a prince presented himself and offered to undertake the challenge. He was well received and in the evening was led into a room adjoining the princess's sleeping hall. His bed was prepared there, and he was to observe where they went and danced. To prevent them from doing anything secretly or going out to another place, the door to the hall was left open. The prince's eyelids grew heavy as lead, and he fell asleep. When he awoke in the morning, all 12 had been to the dance, for their shoes were standing there with holes in the soles. The same thing happened on the second and third nights, and then his head was struck off without mercy. Many others came and undertook the challenge, but all forfeited their lives. It happened that a poor soldier, who had a wound and could no longer serve, was on his way to the town where the king lived. He met an old woman who asked him where he was going. "I don't really know myself," he replied, and jokingly added, "I might as well try to find out where the princesses wear out their shoes and then become king." "That is not so difficult," said the old woman. "You must not drink the wine that will be brought to you in the evening, and you must pretend to be sound asleep." With that, she gave him a little cloak and said, "If you put this on, you will be invisible, and then you can follow the 12. After receiving this good advice, the soldier took it seriously. He gathered his courage, went to the king, and announced himself as a suitor. He was received just as well as the others and was given royal garments. In the evening, at bedtime, he was led to the antechamber. As he was about to go to bed, the eldest princess brought him a cup of wine, but he had tied a sponge under his chin, let the wine run down into it, and did not drink a drop. Then he lay down, and after a while, he began to snore as if in the deepest sleep. The 12 princesses heard this, laughed, and the eldest said, "He might as well have saved his life too." After that, they got up, opened wardrobes, chests, and boxes, and took out splendid dresses. They dressed up in front of the mirrors, jumped about, and rejoiced at the prospect of dancing. Only the youngest said, "I don't know. You are all so happy, but I feel very strange. Surely some misfortune will befall us." "You are a silly goose," said the eldest, "always frightened. Have you forgotten how many princes have already come here in vain? I wouldn't have even needed to give the soldier a sleeping draught. The lout wouldn't have woken up anyway." Once they were all ready, they first looked at the soldier, but he had closed his eyes and did not move, so they felt completely secure. The eldest then went to her bed and tapped it. Immediately, it sank into the earth, and one after the other, they descended through the opening, the eldest leading the way. The soldier, who had watched everything, did not hesitate, put on his cloak, and followed them down, behind the youngest. Halfway down the steps, he accidentally stepped a little on her dress, and she was frightened and cried out, "What is that? Who is pulling at my dress?" "Don't be so silly," said the eldest. "You've caught it on a nail." They continued down, and when they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a wonderfully beautiful avenue of trees with leaves of silver that shimmered and shone. The soldier thought, "I must take a token with me," and broke off a branch. The tree made a loud cracking sound. The youngest cried out again, "Something is wrong. Did you hear that crack?" But the eldest said, "Those are just celebratory gunshots because we will soon have freed our princes." They then came to an avenue where all the leaves were of gold, and finally to a third where the leaves were of bright diamonds. He broke off a branch from each, and each time there was a loud crack that frightened the youngest, but the eldest insisted they were just celebratory gunshots. They continued on and came to a large lake where 12 little boats stood. In each boat sat a handsome prince who had been waiting for the 12 princesses. Each prince took one princess with him, but the soldier sat with the youngest. The prince said, "I don't know why, but the boat feels much heavier today, and I must row with all my strength to get it across." "What could it be?" said the youngest. "But the warm weather. I feel very warm too." On the other side of the lake stood a splendid, bright-lit castle, from which joyous music of trumpets and drums resounded. They rowed over, entered, and each prince danced with his beloved. The soldier, however, danced invisibly with them, and whenever one of them held a cup of wine, he drank it so that it was empty when she brought it to her mouth. The youngest was alarmed by this, but the eldest always silenced her. They danced until 3 o'clock in the morning, by which time all their shoes were worn out and they had to stop. The princes then rowed them back over the water, and this time the soldier sat at the front with the eldest. On the shore, they took leave of their princes and promised to return the following night. When they reached the stairs, the soldier ran ahead and lay down in his bed, and when the 12 princesses came up slowly and wearily, he was already snoring so loudly that they could all hear him, and they said, "We are safe from him." They took off their beautiful dresses, put them away, placed the worn-out shoes under the bed, and lay down. The next morning, the soldier said nothing, intending to observe the strange events further, and he went with them again on the second and third nights. Everything happened just as it had the first time, and each time they danced until their shoes were in pieces. However, on the third night, he took a cup as a token. When the hour came for him to give his answer, he brought the 3 branches and the cup with him and went before the king. The 12 princesses stood behind the door and listened to what he would say. When the king asked, "Where have my 12 daughters worn out their shoes at night?" he replied, "With 12 princes in an underground castle," and explained how everything had happened, producing the tokens. The king then summoned his daughters and asked if the soldier had told the truth. Seeing that they were betrayed and that lying was useless, they had to confess everything. The king then asked him which one he would choose as his wife. He answered, "I am no longer young, so give me the eldest." The wedding was held that same day, and he was promised the kingdom upon the king's death. However, the princes were cursed again for as many days as they had danced nights with the 12 princesses. The 6 servants. Once upon a time, there lived an old queen who was a sorceress, and her daughter was the most beautiful girl under the sun. However, the old woman thought of nothing but how she could lure people to their doom, and when a suitor came, she said that whoever wanted her daughter must first solve a task, or he must die. Many were dazzled by the beauty of the maiden and took the risk, but they could not accomplish what the old woman imposed on them. And then there was no mercy. They had to kneel down, and their heads were struck off. A certain king's son had also heard of the great beauty of the maiden and said to his father, "Let me go there, I want to court her." "Never," answered the king. "If you go to your death." Thereupon, the son lay down and became mortally ill and lay there for 7 years, and no physician could help him. When the father saw that there was no more hope, he said to him with a heavy heart, "Go and try your luck. I know no other way to help you." When the son heard that, he rose from his bed, became healthy, and set out happily on his way. As it happened, when he was riding across a heath, he saw something lying on the ground from afar that looked like a large haystack, and as he approached, he could discern that it was the stomach of a man who had stretched out there. The stomach looked like a small mountain. When the fat one saw the traveler, he stood up and said, "If you need someone, take me into your service." The king's son answered, "What should I do with such an ungainly man?" "Oh," said the fat one, "that is nothing. When I really stretch out, I am 3,000 times fatter." "If that is the case," said the king's son, "I can use you. Come with me." So the fat one followed the king's son, and after a while, they found another man lying on the ground with his ear laid to the grass. The king's son asked, "What are you doing there?" "I am listening," replied the man. "What are you listening to so attentively?" "I am listening to what is happening in the world, for nothing escapes my ears. I even hear the grass growing." The king's son asked, "Tell me, what do you hear at the court of the old queen who has the beautiful daughter?" Then he answered, "I hear the sword whistling, which is cutting off a suitor's head." The king's son said, "I can use you. Come with me." They went further and saw a pair of feet lying there, and also part of the legs, but they could not see the end. After they had walked a good distance, they came to the body and finally to the head. "My," said the king's son, "what a long fellow you are." "Oh," replied the tall one, "that is nothing. When I really stretch out my limbs, I am 3,000 times as tall and taller than the highest mountain on earth. I will gladly serve you if you will take me. Come with me, said the king's son, I can use you. They continued on and found a man sitting by the wayside, his eyes bound. The king's son said to him, Do you have poor eyes that you cannot see into the light? No, replied the man. I must not remove the blindfold, for whatever I look upon with my eyes falls apart, so powerful is my gaze. If it can benefit you, I am willing to serve you. Come with me, replied the king's son. I can use you. They journeyed on and came upon a man lying in the hot sunshine, trembling and shivering all over his body so that no limb stayed still. How can you be cold? Said the king's son, and the sun shines so warmly. Oh, replied the man, my nature is of a completely different kind. The hotter it is, the more I freeze, and frost penetrates through all my bones. The colder it is, the hotter I become. In the middle of ice, I am overcome by heat, and in the midst of fire, I cannot endure the cold. You are a strange fellow, said the king's son, but if you wish to serve me, come along. They continued on and saw a man standing there, craning his neck, looking around and peering beyond all mountains. The king's son asked, What are you looking at so eagerly? The man replied, I have such keen eyes that I can see beyond all forests and fields, valleys and mountains, and through the entire world. The king's son said, If you will come with me, for someone like you is just what I need. Now the king's son entered the city with his 6 servants, where the old queen lived. He did not reveal who he was, but he said, If you will give me your beautiful daughter, I will accomplish whatever you impose upon me. The sorceress rejoiced that such a handsome youth had fallen into her trap again, and said, Thrice I will set you a task. If you solve each one, you shall be my daughter's lord and husband. What is the first task? He asked. That you bring me a ring that I dropped into the Red Sea. So the king's son went home to his servants and said, The first task is not easy. A ring must be fetched from the Red Sea. Let's think of a plan. Then the man with keen eyes said, I will see where it lies, looked down into the sea, and said, There it hangs on a sharp stone. The tall one carried him there and said, I would fetch it out if only I could see it. If that's all, exclaimed the fat one, lying down and putting his mouth to the water. The waves fell into it like into an abyss, and he drank up the entire sea, so that it became as dry as a meadow. The tall one bent down a little and pulled out the ring with his hand. The king's son was delighted when he had the ring and brought it to the old woman. She was amazed and said, Yes, it is the right ring. You have successfully completed the first task, but now comes the second. Do you see there on the meadow in front of my castle 300 fat oxen grazing? You must consume them entirely, hide, hair, bones, and horns. And downstairs in the cellar lie 300 barrels of wine, which you must also drink up. And if there remains a single hair from the oxen or a drop of wine, your life is forfeit to me. The king's son said, May I not invite guests to join me? No meal tastes good without company. The old woman laughed maliciously and replied, You may invite one person to accompany you, so you have some company, but no one else. Then the king's son went to his servants and said to the fat one, Today you shall be my guest, and eat your fill. So the fat one expanded himself and ate the 300 oxen so that not a hair remained, then asked if there was nothing more than breakfast. He promptly drank up all the wine from the barrels without needing a glass, and even drank the last drop from the nail. When the meal was over, the king's son went to the old woman and told her the second task was completed. She was astonished and said, No one has ever come this far, but there is still one task left. Thinking, You shall not escape me, and you shall not keep your head. Tonight, she said, I will bring my daughter to your chamber, and you shall embrace her with your arm. When you sit together, beware that you do not fall asleep. I will come at the stroke of 12, and if she is no longer in your arms, you will have lost. The king's son thought, This task is easy. I will keep my eyes wide open. However, he called his servants, told them what the old woman had said, and said, Who knows what trickery lies behind this? Caution is wise. Keep watch, and ensure the maiden does not leave my chamber. As night fell, the old woman came with her daughter and led her into the king's son's arms. The tall one then encircled them both in a ring, and the fat one positioned himself in front of the door so that no living soul could enter. They sat there together, and the maiden did not speak a word, but the moon shone through the window upon her face, revealing her wondrous beauty. The king's son did nothing but gaze at her, full of joy and love, and no weariness came to his eyes. This continued until 11 o'clock, when the old woman cast a spell over them all, causing them to fall asleep. And at that moment, the maiden vanished. They slept heavily until 11:45, when the spell weakened, and they all woke again. "Oh, woe and misfortune," cried the king's son. "Now I am lost." His faithful servants also began to lament, but the listener said, "Be silent, I will listen." He listened for a moment and then said, "She sits in a rock 300 hours from here, lamenting her fate. Only you can help, tall one. If you rise up, you can reach there in a few steps." "Yes," replied the tall one, "but the one with keen eyes must come with me to remove the rock." So the tall one lifted up the one with bound eyes, and in an instant, as if turning a hand, they were before the accursed rock. Immediately, the tall one removed the blindfold from the other, who glanced around, causing the rock to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The tall one then carried the maiden in his arms, swiftly brought her back, and just as quickly fetched his comrade. Before midnight struck, they were all back as before, lively and in good spirits. When midnight struck, the old sorceress crept over, making a mocking face as if to say, "Now he is mine," believing her daughter was 300 hours away in the rock. However, when she saw her daughter in the arms of the king's son, she was shocked and said, "There is one who can do more than I." But she could not object and had to promise him the maiden. She whispered in her daughter's ear, "Shame on you, to obey common folk and not be allowed to choose a husband to your liking." Then the maiden's proud heart was filled with anger, and she plotted revenge. The next morning she had 300 bushels of wood brought together, and said to the king's son that the 3 tasks were completed. She would not become his wife until someone was willing to sit in the middle of the wood and endure the fire. She thought none of his servants would burn for him, and out of love for her, he would sit himself, thus setting her free. However, the servants said, "We have all done something, except the frosty one. He must also do this." They placed him in the middle of the woodpile and set it ablaze. The fire started burning and continued for 3 days until all the wood was consumed. When the flames died down, the frosty one stood in the ashes, trembling like an aspen leaf, and said, "I have never endured such frost in all my life, and if it had lasted any longer, I would have frozen solid." Now there seemed to be no hope left, and the beautiful maiden had to take the unknown youth as her husband. However, as they were traveling to the church for their wedding, the old woman said, "I cannot bear this shame," and sent her army to destroy everything in its path and bring her daughter back. But the listener had overheard the old woman's secret plans. "What shall we do?" he said to the fat one, who knew what to do. He spat once or twice behind the wagon a portion of the seawater he had drunk, creating a large lake where the armies got stuck and drowned. When the sorceress heard this, she sent her armored riders, but the listener heard the clatter of their armor and untied the blindfold of one of them, who looked sharply at the enemies, causing them to scatter like glass. Now they continued on their way undisturbed, and after they were blessed in the church, the 6 servants took their leave, saying to their master, "Your wishes are fulfilled. You no longer need us. We will go on and try our luck." Half an hour before the castle, there was a village where a swineherd was tending his herd. When they arrived, he said to his wife, "Do you know who I really am? I am not a king's son, but a swineherd, and that man there with the herd is my father. Both of us must help tend to them." Then he and his wife went into the inn and secretly told the innkeepers that in the night they should take away her royal clothes. When she woke up in the morning, she had nothing to wear, and the innkeeper gave her an old dress and a pair of old woolen stockings, pretending it was a great gift and saying, "If it weren't for your husband, I wouldn't have given it to you at all." She believed then that he was truly a swineherd, and she tended the herd with him, thinking, "I have earned this with my arrogance and pride." This lasted for 8 days until she could bear it no longer, her feet having become sore. Some people came and asked if she knew who her husband really was. Yes, she answered. He is a swineherd and has just gone out to do some trading with ribbons and strings. They said, "Come with us. We will take you to him," and brought her up to the castle. When she entered the hall, her husband stood there in royal clothes. She did not recognize him until he embraced her, kissed her, and said, "I have suffered so much for you. Now you shall suffer for me." Only then was the wedding celebrated, and whoever tells this story wishes he had been there too. The White Bride and the Black One, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. A woman was going about the unenclosed land with her daughter and her stepdaughter cutting fodder when the Lord came walking towards them in the form of a poor man and asked, "Which is the way into the village?" "If you want to know," said the mother, "seek it for yourself." And the daughter added, "If you are afraid you will not find it, take a guide with you." However, the stepdaughter said, "Poor man, I will take you there. Come with me." Then God was angry with the mother and daughter and turned his back on them and wished that they should become as black as night and as ugly as sin. To the poor stepdaughter, however, God was gracious and went with her, and when they were near the village, he said a blessing over her and spake, "Choose 3 things for thyself, and I will grant them to thee." Then said the maiden, "I should like to be as beautiful and fair as the sun." And instantly she was white and fair as day. "Then I should like to have a purse of money which would never grow empty." That the Lord gave her also, but he said, "Do not forget what is best of all." Said she, "For my 3rd wish I desire after my death to inhabit the eternal kingdom of heaven." That also was granted unto her, and then the Lord left her. When the stepmother came home with her daughter, and they saw that they were both as black as coal and ugly, but that the stepdaughter was white and beautiful, wickedness increased still more in their hearts, and they thought of nothing else but how they could do her an injury. The stepdaughter, however, had a brother called Reginer, whom she loved much, and she told him all that had happened. Once on a time Reginer said to her, "Dear sister, I will take thy likeness, that I may continually see thee before mine eyes, for my love for thee is so great that I should like always to look at thee." Then she answered, "Nevertheless, I pray thee, let no one see the picture." So he painted his sister and hung up the picture in his room. He, however, dwelt in the king's palace, for he was his coachman. Every day he went and stood before the picture and thanked God for the happiness of having such a dear sister. Now it happened that the king whom he served had just lost his wife, who had been so beautiful that no one could be found to compare with her. And on this account the king was in deep grief. The attendants about the court, however, remarked that the coachman stood daily before this beautiful picture, and they were jealous of him, so they informed the king. Then the latter ordered the picture to be brought to him, and when he saw that it was like his lost wife in every respect, except that it was still more beautiful, he fell mortally in love with it. He caused the coachman to be brought before him, and asked whom the portrait represented. The coachman said it was his sister, so the king resolved to take no one but her as his wife, and gave him a carriage and horses and splendid garments of cloth of gold, and sent him forth to fetch his chosen bride. When Reginer came on this errand, his sister was glad, but the black maiden was jealous of her good fortune, and grew angry above all measure, and said to her mother, "Of what use are all your arts to us now, when you cannot procure such a piece of luck for me?" "Be quiet," said the old woman. "I will soon divert it to you." And by her arts of witchcraft, she so troubled the eyes of the coachman that he was half blind, and she stopped the ears of the white maiden so that she was half deaf. Then they got into the carriage, first the bride in her noble royal apparel, then the stepmother with her daughter, and Reginer sat on the box to drive. When they had been on the way for some time, the coachman cried, "Cover thee well, my sister dear, that the rain may not wet thee, that the wind may not load thee with dust, that thou mayst be fair and beautiful when thou appearest before the king." The bride asked, "What is my dear brother saying?" "Ah," said the old woman, "he suggests that you should remove your golden dress and give it to your sister." So she took it off and placed it on the black maiden, who gave her in exchange a shabby gray gown. As they continued their journey, shortly after, the brother cried out again, "Cover yourself well, my dear sister." so that the rain does not wet you, so that the wind does not cover you with dust, so that you may appear fair and beautiful when you arrive before the king. The bride asked, "What is my dear brother saying?" "Ah," said the old woman, "he suggests that you should remove your golden hood and give it to your sister." So she removed the hood and placed it on her sister, sitting with her own head uncovered. They continued on their way. After a while, the brother cried out once more, "Cover yourself well, my dear sister, so that the rain does not wet you, so that the wind does not cover you with dust, so that you may appear fair and beautiful when you arrive before the king." The bride asked, "What is my dear brother saying?" "Ah," said the old woman, "he says you must look out of the carriage." However, they were on a bridge over deep water. When the bride stood up and leaned out of the carriage, they both pushed her out, and she fell into the middle of the water. At that moment, a snow-white duck emerged from the smooth surface of the water and swam down the river. The brother had noticed nothing and continued to drive the carriage until they reached the court. There, he presented the black maiden to the king as his sister, believing her to be so because his vision was blurred, and he saw the golden garments shining. When the king saw the immense ugliness of his intended bride, he was very angry and ordered the coachman to be thrown into a pit filled with adders and snake nests. However, the old witch knew how to flatter the king and deceive his eyes with her arts. So he kept her and her daughter until they seemed tolerable to him, and he actually married her. One evening, while the black bride was sitting on the king's knee, a white duck swam up the gutter to the kitchen and said to the kitchen boy, "Boy, light a fire so that I can warm my feathers." The kitchen boy did so and lit a fire on the hearth. The duck then came and sat beside it, shaking herself and smoothing her feathers with her bill. While she sat there enjoying herself, she asked, "What is my brother Reginald doing?" The scullery boy replied, "He is imprisoned in the pit with adders and snakes." Then she asked, "What is the black witch doing in the house?" The boy answered, "She is loved by the king and happy." "May God have mercy on him," said the duck, and swam away through the sink. The next night she returned and asked the same questions, and the third night as well. Finally, the kitchen boy could bear it no longer and went to the king and revealed everything to him. The king, however, wanted to see for himself, so the next evening he went there, and when the duck stuck her head through the sink, he took his sword and cut off her head, and suddenly she transformed into the most beautiful maiden, exactly like the picture her brother had painted of her. The king was overjoyed, and as she stood there quite wet, he had splendid clothes brought and dressed her in them. She then recounted how she had been betrayed by deceit and lies, and her first request was for her brother to be brought out from the pit of snakes. After the king fulfilled this request, he went to the chamber where the old witch was and asked, "What does someone deserve who does such and such?" and recounted what had happened. Then she was so blinded that she understood nothing and said, "She deserves to be stripped naked and put into a barrel with nails, and a horse should be harnessed to the barrel and sent all over the world." All of this was done to her and her black daughter. But the king married the white and beautiful bride, rewarded her faithful brother, and made him a rich and distinguished man.